Today we are going to talk about the psychology of Buddhism. When we speak about psychology, we are talking about the mind. Psychology is the study of the mind. In the West, people in the West wanted to study the mind, and that is how they started calling this psychology. But a problem occurred. The problem was they couldn't find the mind. Although they tried to study the mind, they were not able to find the mind. So how can they study the mind if the mind is not found? So what happened was, they started saying, we cannot find the mind. So therefore we call the psychology the study of human behavior. So behavior was the only thing that they could get hold of. This was the problem. You know, the teaching of the Buddha, if you study the teaching of the Buddha, the practice of the teaching is in 3 stages: Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. Sila is the discipline of behavior. Samadhi is the purification of the mind. Panya is the purification of the intellect. Intellect is the thinking part. Now it appears that those who started talking about the behavior, they can only talk about that first step, Sila. They can't talk about Samadhi and Panya. It was later that a psychologist who was a medical doctor, became interested in treating mental sicknesses. The mental sickness. These mental sicknesses came in the form of two forms: neurosis and psychosis. Now, in trying to treat the mental sicknesses, he had to study the mind. Without studying the mind, how can they talk about mental sicknesses? So, this psychologist, Sigmund Freud, studied the mind, and he found three things, or three parts of the mind, which he gave three names for the three parts. One part he called the id, I-D, id. ID, id, referred to the emotions. You know what an emotion is. Emotion really is a disturbance of the mind. It's an emotional disturbance. That means if you become angry, that is an emotional disturbance. If you become frightened, it is an emotional disturbance. If you become passionate and lustful, that is also an emotional disturbance. If you begin to worry, that is an emotional disturbance. That emotional disturbance is what is called the id, ID, id. The other word that he used was ego, E-G-O, ego. These are really Latin words. The id is the Latin for the English it, it. And ego is the Latin for self. In English, self. Why did he use these two words? One is the id, like it. Because the ego referred to the thinking part. So in other words, he saw in the mind an emotional part and a thinking part. And the emotional part he called the it. And the thinking part he called the self. Why is this? The English word it refers to things of the neuter gender. Now this bottle is the neuter gender. That means it doesn't have any life. So when you refer to something that has no life, you call it the it. Otherwise, if you talk about a human being, you say either he or she. And that he or she part is what he called the ego, the self. That means the emotional part he referred to as the neuter gender. And the thinking part was like the he and the she. That means when we talk about a person, we are really looking at the thinking part. When you say, I did this, that I refers to the thinking part. You understand? But very often people say, I am angry. Now if you say, I am angry, then you are using the word I to that emotional part. Anger is the emotional part. If you say, I am frightened, then again you are referring to the emotional part. But actually, when you think of anger, is that something that you do? We take being frightened or being worried. Is that something that you do? Are you doing the worry? It is happening to you. Anger is also something that is happening to you. You are not doing it. You understand? If you are frightened, it is something that is happening to you. If you are worried, that is something that is happening to you. You are not doing it. That means all emotions are things that happen to you. It is not something that you really do. That is why Freud put it into the neuter gender. Neuter gender is something that is happening to you. not something that you do. The doing is the thinking part. That is why he called that the ego. This is very important to understand, that whenever we really get angry, or even when we desire something, or you say you fall in love, that is also not something that you do, it is happening to you. You see, all emotions are things that happen to you. That is why he called it id. You see, it's very important to understand that. And therefore, if you say, I want to control my anger, what are you doing? The thinking part is doing the controlling. It is the thinking part that is controlling the neuter gender anger. Did you understand that? So it is very important to understand that we have two parts. The thinking part and the emotional part. Did the Buddha talk about this? Most people who study Buddhism, they don't understand this. Buddha used two words to refer to the mind. One is chitta and the other is mano. Chitta and mano. Chitta refers to the emotional part and mano refers to the thinking part. So it's very important to understand that. Chitta is the emotional part and mano is the thinking part. Now, there is a verse in the book called the Dhamma. There is a book of verses called the Dhamma. Some of you may know about this. And the first verse in the Dhamma says, Mano pubbangama dhamma. Mano pubbangama dhamma. What does that mean? Mano is the thinking part. Pubbangama means precedes. You know the meaning of the word precede. Precede means comes before. The thinking part comes before the emotional part. What that means is, when we become angry, first, why do we become angry? because of the way we think. This person did this to me. That is a thought. And then you become angry. This person insulted me, and you become angry. Or this person hurt my feelings, and then you become angry. So it is the thought that you think that starts the emotional disturbance. That was the important thing that the Buddha pointed out. This is something that Sigmund Freud didn't understand. Because Sigmund Freud thought that these emotions come from inside the body and trying to go out, seeking an outlet. Because the anger is something coming from the body. You see, today the scientists have discovered that this anger is due to what are called hormones. In the body, there are certain glands, and these glands secrete a substance called hormone. And when the hormones are secreted, this hormone is carried to the whole body when the heart begins to beat. And when it goes to the body, different parts of the body begins to act. And that is the meaning of becoming angry. Your muscles become tensed, and various parts of the body begin to act and gets disturbed. The whole body gets disturbed when you become angry. When you are frightened also, the body is disturbed. That disturbance is today called stress. Now people today talk about a thing called stress. And that stress is a disturbance of the body. And that disturbance is creating sickness. The body becomes sick as a result. And this is why they have a thing called stress management. People begin to teach people how to manage stress. You understand? And here, the Sigmund Freud found that it was very difficult to get rid of this emotional disturbance. But, you know, later, a different kind of psychology came up. This was after Freud. Freud was living at the beginning of the 20th century. Like 1900, like. Huh? That's the beginning of the 20th century. But somewhere in the half of the 20th century, this new psychology came up. It was called cognitive psychology. This cognitive psychology began to use the word cognition to refer to the thinking part. The thinking part was called cognition. And that emotional part was called affection. The cognitive and the affective. And they started saying the emotion is aroused because of the cognition. That is, the thinking part precedes the emotional arousal. And therefore, by changing the thinking, you can stop the emotional disturbance. You know, I went to United States in 1970. 1970 I went to the United States, and there I had to talk to the American people about the teachings of the Buddha. And when I was talking, I told the people that the Buddha completely eradicated lust, hate and delusion, lobha, dosa and moha. Lobha is lust, dosa is hate, moha is delusion. So a man who was listening began to laugh. I asked, why are you laughing? He said, how can a person get rid of lust, hate and delusion? Because according to Freud, these are things that come from inside your own body and you cannot get rid of it. Because he has been studying Sigmund Freud's. So I had to point out, have you studied cognitive psychology? It was the cognitive psychologists who discovered that it is possible to get rid of emotions by changing the way you think. This is very important to understand that. And this is what the Buddha has been saying 2,500 years before these Western people understood this. And that is how he was able to gain freedom from lust, hate and delusion. Very important to understand that the teaching of the Buddha is far above the modern scientists. You see, today the scientists are doing wonderful things. But with all the wonderful things, have they stopped crime? Have they stopped murders? Have they stopped wars? All the problems in the world are due to the emotions. When people become emotionally agitated, they lose all their wisdom. They are carried away by emotions. Emotions dominate mankind. It is very important to understand that. There is a verse where the Buddha speaks about this. Chittena niyati loko, chittena parikassati, chittassa ekadammassa sabbeva vasamang vagu. What that means is, chitta is the emotional part. Chittena niyati loko means that emotional part is dominating the world. Chittena parikassati, that emotional part is disturbing the mind. Chittassa ekadammassa, chitta, the emotional part, is this one thing. Sabbeva vasamang vagu, to which all people are spellbound. People are spellbound to these emotions. Although human beings are able to do wonderful things with the thinking part, but the emotional part is dominating the thinking part. This is the problem. The thinking part is dominated by the emotional part. The thinking part is doing what the emotions want you to do. This is why they created this wonderful thing called the nuclear bomb. Why did they make the nuclear bomb? Because the emotional part wanted it to kill the enemies. Killing the enemies is coming out of anger or fear. So it is the emotional part that wanted people to create this bomb. Now people are frightened that if a war begins, that is the end of the whole planet. You see, this is what the Buddha pointed out. You know, the Buddha, through the meditations, he developed the mind to a great extent, and he could do wonderful things. But during the time of the Buddha, there is a story where a certain person came to the Buddha and said, I am very much pleased about the powers that the Buddha has developed. He has the power, if he wants. It's only making a wish. May this Himalaya mountain, what is called the Mount Everest, like big mountain, if he makes a wish, may this mountain become a mountain of gold. It will become a mountain of gold. He has powers like that. So he says, out of compassion for these human beings, please make that wish, and it will become a mountain of gold. So the Buddha said, yes, you have understood my powers, but do you know, if I do that, how many people will be killed as a result? Because everyone will want to own this mountain of gold, and there will be wars, and so many people will be killed as a result. If you have studied the history of United States, you will know that there was a period where there was a thing called the gold rush. Somewhere in California, they discovered gold, and there were people who dig holes in the earth to get gold. And not only just getting gold, there were many wars. People rushed to get this gold and killed one another. That was called the gold rush. There were many wars going on and many people being killed. Now this proves what the Buddha has just been saying. You see, the important thing is that human beings, very important thing to understand is that human beings are animals. Out of all the animals, it is the human being who has developed that thinking ability. When we are born into this world, there's children. Their thinking ability is poor, but the emotional part is developed. This is why we need what is called a babysitter to look after the children, because the children's thinking part is not fully developed. What this means is that the thinking part comes later. The emotional part is there even at the beginning. This is why the first thing when a baby is born, what is the thing that the baby does? Crying. Why? That is because of the emotions. So the baby is born with the emotions, but there is no thinking. The thinking begins to develop only later. And this is why even the thinking begins to be influenced by the emotions. This is how the emotions begin to dominate the mind of people. Because the emotions are the elder part. The thinking part is the young part. and the emotions begin to influence the thinking. And when the emotions begin to influence the thinking is not straight thinking. So this is why it is very important to learn the teachings of the Buddha. It was the Buddha who taught people how to gain control over the emotions. And it is only by learning this that we can find happiness in our lives. So it is very important to understand how to gain control over our emotions. And that is the meaning of meditation. What we call meditation is learning how to gain control over our emotions. And it is only by learning to gain control over our emotions that we can be happy. We'll be having a meditation retreat very soon. Huh? And so, if you like to learn these things, you should come to learn meditation. Huh? Okay, we end our talk at this point, and if you have any questions, you can ask. Now it's very difficult for me to hear.
We Buddhists believe in rebirth, life after life. Can our thinking part pass on life after life? So that when we born, we have this thinking overcoming the emotion.
Yeah? What is that?
He's saying that as a Buddhist, we live life after life. Can we, when we get the next rebirth, can our thinking part still there to control our emotion?
Well, it's very important to understand that it is the emotions that begin the next life. According to the way you have gained control over emotions, if you have a good mind at the moment of death, then you will be born in a good situation. If your mind is bad at the time of death, then you will be born in a bad situation. So the place you are going to be born depends on your emotional state. This is why it is very important to practice good behavior and good thinking. This is very important. Yeah.
Bhante, some people are born more intelligent and some people are not so clever.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that is there a possibility that intelligence can be carried forward to the next rebirth? That's why they.
Well, whether you are intelligent or not is also depending on the emotions. You see, the less you are getting emotionally disturbed, the more intelligent you are. Intelligence also is dependent on the calmness of the mind. This is why it is very important to learn how to calm the mind. So purifying the mind is the same thing as calming the mind. Yeah.
I ask because in bringing up children, little
Yeah,
children,
yeah,
they are supposed to be born neutral. Yeah?
yeah.
But we notice that some children are smarter, more intelligent. And we say it's like, oh, they inherit the,
Yeah.
you know. I mean, they say it's in the genes, it's more intelligent. I'm trying to relate that maybe it's carried forward from previous life, you know, accumulated intelligence that's carried forward. So if you try to
Yeah. The
if you try to
intelligence
learn
of the
and clever
children.
this life, it also helps in your future life. That's why.
Yeah. That intelligence of the children also depends on the intelligence of the parents. And the parents, if they are very calm people, their children will become intelligent also. So it's very important. Now, if the father or mother, people who drink this alcohol and all kinds of things, the child also will begin to learn all these things and also influenced by this, and then they lose their intelligence. This is what happens.
But Bhante,
Yeah.
when we have 2-3 children,
Huh?
we notice that some children are more intelligent, our own children.
Yeah.
Some are more clever.
Yeah.
So where the some are more clever, some are...
That is all coming from the past life. If during the past life the children have been practicing good behavior and all that, that is how that person will become intelligent. So it's very important to learn to discipline your mind. This is why the meditation is very important. Huh? Very important to learn meditation. But even in meditation, very few people know how to meditate. Some people think meditation is just learning to concentrate or something. Concentration is not meditation. Meditation is purifying the mind. You have to learn to purify the mind by thinking in the right way. It is cultivating good thoughts. That is the most important thing. This is why in our meditation we begin by what is called selective thinking. Selective thinking means thinking right thoughts. You select the thoughts you think. You are not thinking any thought that comes into your mind. So that is the starting point of meditation, not concentration. So it's very important to learn this. Yeah?
Bhante, I have a question. It's regarding the precepts, the precept number 4.
Yeah, the precepts are very important because that you have to start practicing the discipline in your behavior before you can even begin to think in the right way.
Yeah, but I would like to find out about the precept number 4. In Buddhism, is there a thing as a white lie? That means we don't want to lie. We're not supposed to lie, but we had to lie because we wanted peace and harmony. So, are we supposed to lie?
No, peace and harmony, all that comes from the emotional state you are in. Everything comes from the emotional state. So that is the meaning of the word chitta. Chitta is the emotional state.
But here it's not emotional state.
Huh?
Here it's not emotional state. It's actually you had to tell a lie because you wanted to keep peace and harmony. So because if you told
You want to tell lies to bring about harmony.
yeah,
No, 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 no. Harmony is not coming from lies. No, no. These are just excuses that people make.
Example of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
example of how you can lie to create harmony.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Bhante, yes, our sister maybe implied.
Dishonesty is not the way to
it's not about dishonesty.
find peace.
It's a bit Bhante, you have
No.
to talk
It's
them.
not about dishonesty.
Yes, yes.
It is that
White
in, a,
lie.
in a situation where you, to avoid conflict, you
Yes,
know,
yes.
to avoid conflicts, so you had to come up with, you had to come up with something.
Yeah, yeah. This is what is called white lies.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So it,
Those are simply just excuses. Yeah, yeah.
thank you.
Okay, brothers and sisters, any more questions?
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. There is one sutta that was saying that Ananda says there are 4 ways to gain enlightenment. He says one way is samatha, then vipassana, then samatha. Then samatha
Yeah,
and
yeah,
vipassana
yeah.
together. Can you explain that?
No, what this means is that there are these 2 kinds of meditation. One is to purify the chitta, and the other is to develop the mano. So what is called vipassana is dealing with the mano, which is the thinking part. And samatha is dealing with the chitta, which is the emotional part. So these are things that can be, while you are meditating, you begin to deal with both. That is the meaning of that. Yeah. So anyway, so we'll bring this to an end now.